Amen. Well, it's great to be with you all tonight. Like Mark said, I'm excited to teach this lesson with Hannah tonight. And so you can open up your Bibles to Matthew chapter 11. And I'm sure that this is the kind of lesson that could be helpful all the time. But I do know that this is a time of year, especially for college students, that can be especially stressful. And you might be feeling like, I need some peace. I need some rest. It does help to know that winter break is coming soon. And it's always good to have things that we're looking forward to and setting ourselves up with that could give us some sanity to have to look forward to. But God does want to help us with this. And so the focus of our lesson tonight is rest for your soul. And it is crazy to believe we're already a week into December. And it has been a crazy adjustment for the last week or two. And I'm sure you're feeling it, like all of a sudden there's 5 assignments due. It's suddenly freezing outside and you need to be layering up. And at the same time, it's like dark at 4:30, feels like it's 8:30, and you have like 3 weeks to buy everyone you love a present, which on top of it all is just, it could just feel ridiculous, like this nagging stress of, having to Christmas shop and everything on top of it all. So, like I said, if any of us are going to not only keep our sanity, but remain joyful and able to be a light throughout this time, we have to learn to go through stressful times or challenging times or just chaotic times with God. And so tonight, Hannah and I want to look at an incredible passage where Jesus offers help to us with this. And so this is one of those verses everybody should know. And so let's read here in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. Jesus says to us, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Amen. That's one of those passages you just read and you feel just a sigh of relief and comfort and encouragement by. You definitely should. I mean, isn't Jesus just so inviting here? And it's also so relatable. Like, how many of you right now or at different times over the year do feel weary? Like it's hard to keep going, or you feel burdened. Like there's a lot of weight that you're carrying. And it is so helpful to know Jesus sees that and wants to help us with that. Jesus invites us to find rest from him. And not just any rest, but he says rest for our soul. And that's important because we know that our bodies need rest. That's why we sleep, right? We know that our minds need rest. That's also why we sleep. And maybe it's good to watch a show here and there. But we know our bodies need rest. We know our minds need rest. And our spiritual health is definitely interconnected with those things. Like we can't totally separate our physical health from our mental health and spiritual health. They're connected. And those things are important. It's important for your soul to get good sleep, to take breaks from working and school, to be disciplined with your time. But the reality is that our souls, our inner being, our souls also need rest. And to just connect with, well, what is that? What does that mean? And I think, we all can relate to that feeling of, man, my soul just needs rest. Maybe it's just a heaviness that you feel, like just a kind of a heaviness in your heart or on your soul that you're carrying around with you, or just being worried about things, stressed about things, overwhelmedness. Maybe it's more on your soul needing rest from like sadness or fear about different things. And I think that a way you could put it is it's like a tiredness deeper than sleep. It's like, okay, I could sleep, but there's also just some rest that my soul really needs. It might be rest from grief and loss. It might be the need that we have at different times, a need for hope, a need for meaning, a need for like a stronger will, like drive or ambition, and a need for strength. Maybe it's soulful rest we need to help us recover from mistakes we've made, or failures that we've had recently, or sin or guilt that we're feeling, or maybe it's needing rest from not feeling good enough or not being good enough, and just dealing with, all of that stuff that I just mentioned. I'm sure a lot of us can relate to at least one of those. And honestly, that's just part of living in a fallen and broken world, is dealing with all of that is part of this life. And it's why we need God. And even just going through it, it's exhausting. And it is exhausting to go through life without God. And even with God, we still live in this world and deal with these things. And so all of that leaves us, as Jesus said, weary and burdened. But what's awesome is God doesn't want to leave us there. Jesus doesn't say, hey, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and we'll just soak in it together. Like, no, he wants to help us with what we're, the rest that our soul needs. He wants to carry the load with us. He wants to lighten the load. He wants to teach us to navigate life with these challenges better and give us rest, give us peace on a much deeper level than anything else can. And so Hannah and I have 2 points for us tonight to help us with this, to help us get this rest for our souls that Jesus is offering. And the 2 points are really just going to come from this passage. And the first one is go to Jesus. To get this soulful rest, you've got to go to Jesus. And secondly, you've got to take on his yoke. And so first, let's talk about going to Jesus. If you feel like, man, I'm dealing with any of that stuff I mentioned, where do I go? How can I get help? Well, you've got to go to Jesus. When your body is tired, right? Like when you're just like, oh my gosh, I need to sleep. I'm sure we've all been in places before where we're like, I've just got to sleep so badly. We've all just hit in levels of tiredness where you're like, I could fall on the ground right here and sleep, right? When you're tired enough, you could lay on a couch, you could lay in a bed, you could sleep on the floor, right? You're like, just give me something and I'll be able to fall asleep, right? If you're tired enough, anywhere will do. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that with our souls. This deeper stuff we need peace and we need help with. We can't just go anywhere for help with that, right? When we are weary and burdened, dealing with all that I just mentioned 2 minutes ago, there is only one place we can really go for help. And Jesus says, come to me. We've got to go to Jesus. And yet we learn from the world and we learn from our sinful nature to go many other places that don't really work for help with stress and grief and recovering from mistakes, or not feeling good enough, or having a lot of weight that we're carrying on our hearts. We learn from the world and our sinful nature to go many other places. And we've got to be aware of like, well, where am I pulled to go? And where am I tempted to go? And for some people, maybe where you want to go is to just hide. You want to go hide somewhere. You want to run away. Maybe you just want to give up. You're like, it's too hard to do this. School is too hard. Being a Christian is too hard, or dealing with this situation is too hard. And we want to hide from it, act like it's not there, avoid it. Another place people can go is maybe the complete opposite of that, right? If you're really stressed with school or with figuring out your future, worried about money, a career, income, or whatever, the opposite could happen, where instead of hiding, maybe you buckle down, overly rely on yourself, and overwork. You just throw yourself into it to an unhealthy degree. You become too busy, too invested, and your stress doesn't really go away, but you're trying to overcome it by putting in even more effort. Another place people can go is leaning into negative emotions, right? Where we just vent this frustration through anger, complaining, slandering our boss or school or teacher or whatever. They're venting anger, venting frustration, complaining about our situation. That could be a place our sinful nature wants us to go. So just lean into the negative emotions that we're feeling. And then obviously a place people can go is sin. Maybe there's more easily excused sins that you can go to. And mainly this could be just overindulgence. Debauchery is overindulging in, pleasing something that maybe brings pleasure or something. And so, if you're carrying a lot of weight or stress or feel like your soul needs rest, maybe you go to overeating. Maybe you go to overwatching, just binge watching TV and shutting everything else out. Maybe it's video games and just losing yourself in that world. Or maybe it's social media. I think it could be so easy, and I can give into this when I'm like stuck or stressed, to just kind of look for some sense of relief from scrolling through Instagram or going to my Google News feed or seeing if there's anything interesting on YouTube, my recommended videos or whatever. And it's just trying to go somewhere else for some sense of relief. And obviously in the world, and where a lot of people could go is chemical sin for some sort of rest for their soul. Alcohol, weed, vaping, hookah. There's so many options for temporary relief that doesn't really fix things. And, for some people, it might be going to impurity or, going to pornography. And that becomes the place that we're looking for peace. And so I don't know where you're tempted to go, but we have to know what we go to, and we have to know what works and what doesn't work. And the things I just said don't really work. All of those things I just mentioned, if you go to those things, it will add to your soul needing rest and healing even more, not give you the rest and healing that your soul needs. And so we got to hear from Matthew 11, Jesus welcoming us, that Jesus is welcoming, he is compassionate, he is eager, he's caring, he sees us weary and burdened, and he says, come to me. And so where are you going to find rest for your soul as you're stressed about finals, about the holidays, about changes in life, about uncertainties, about the future? Where are you going to find rest for your soul, right? And is what you're going to working? Is it working? And if it's not Jesus, it's not working. And so how are you doing with going to Jesus, and how can you go to Jesus more? Because Jesus is the best place and the only place to go to find rest for our soul. I'm going to hand it over to Hannah to share some here.
Okay, so I know Rob was just inspiring us to go to Jesus and not these other things. And I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about why Jesus is the one that we should go to. And I see a worthy answer right here in this passage. I'm currently reading a book right now called Gentle and Lowly, and it talks about the heart of Christ for sinners and sufferers. And it's based on verse 29 of this passage. And the author pointed out that this is the only time in the four Gospels that Jesus tells us about his own heart. And the way that he describes himself is gentle and humble, or gentle and lowly in heart. And I'm going to read a quote and then also share some other general thoughts from the book that I'm learning and things that I'm taking away in my own life. So if you weren't listening, listen up, because this isn't from me. This is like a scholar who is just way smarter than me. And so he's got some good stuff that I want to share with you guys. So he says, in the one place in the Bible where the Son of God pulls back the veil and lets us peer way down into the core of who he is, we are not told that he is austere and demanding in heart. We are not told that he is exalted and dignified in heart. And we are not even told that he is joyful and generous in heart. Letting Jesus set the terms, his surprising claim is that he is gentle and lowly in heart. And after reading this book and different commentaries about the definition of gentle and humble, I just want to share some thoughts about what I've learned about the definitions. So for Jesus to be gentle, it means that he is not harsh or reactionary. He is understanding. And a visual way that's helping me to think about this is that he is arms wide open and not a pointed finger. So he's welcoming me and not thinking or being harsh and pointing a finger of how bad I am. And the best way that I can describe what it means for Jesus to be humble, it means that he is accessible and he is approachable. And to me, this has been so special to learn about and focus on, because when I think about understanding people's hearts, I usually can connect better to them, and I can feel more like I understand what they're saying because I know where it's coming from in their heart. I know their intentions, and I know just deep to their core, like their values and what they are. And I've grown in my, and as I've grown in my understanding about Jesus, I've become more drawn to going to him. I've learned that he is safe and he's going to deal gently with me. He is going to meet me where I'm at and relate to me. And being vulnerable is not something that comes very natural for me. It's really hard. And most of the women here who have had a one-on-one real conversation with me would probably say that I am an open book and I share my life and I'm real about the things that I've experienced or gone through or sin in my life. But to be vulnerable and in a place where I feel weak, especially with something that is currently going on and that is deep, it can be much harder for me. But when I feel safe with someone, it is easier for me to go to them and be vulnerable about what's really going on. And because of what I'm learning and understanding about Jesus and his heart, and that he is gentle and humble in heart, and this is becoming easier for me to be vulnerable in my weak moments, to go to Jesus. And I'm learning that my burden is what qualifies me to come to Jesus. And it is my weariness that qualifies me to come to him. That's the only thing that this passage really says about a person who is to come to Jesus, is when we are weary and burdened.
Amen. Thanks so much for sharing those things, Hannah. And it does help us so much to want to go to Jesus. Like she said, the better we know him and his heart. And it is amazing what Jesus does reveal about himself here. And so just to give you a few more practicals on like, well, how can I go to Jesus? And, you know, obviously prioritizing time with God is like the primary way. It's just in your day, there's so much other stuff that we're chasing after, but Matthew 6 tells us every time you go read it, seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and the rest will be given to you as well. But are we seeking first his kingdom and his righteousness? And so prioritizing time with God is a big part of how we go to Jesus, taking breaks away from work, away from distractions, to spend time with God in the word and in prayer. And when you do this, not doing it like it's a checklist item, like, okay, I prayed today, I read the Bible today, but doing this in a relational way, in a meaningful way, in a purposeful way, like, okay, I need God, I need his word, I need to pray to him, and being authentic and sincere as you do those things. And so when I'm really feeling it, like, you know, I'll hit a wall some weeks of just feeling overwhelmed or down or worried about something. And I know I hit walls where I'm like, I need to go on a long prayer walk, you know, and I try to go on at least one long prayer walk a week, but like I just know like I need to go connect with God somewhere. And so, you know, you need your own like private place where you can focus, or place where you can go on a prayer walk. But like Hannah shared about being vulnerable. Like that's a big part of it, is being vulnerable with God and learning to express yourself to God more and talk more. And, a lot of us can talk at length to a close friend, but then only talk to God for 2 minutes about stuff we're trying to deal with. Well, how about praying to God for 20 minutes, an hour? Like when Jesus was going to the cross, he prayed for seemingly 3 hours in the Garden of Gethsemane. And, when we're going through stuff, it's good to go really get time to connect with God. And if you're not sure what to say, even, I think the Bible's given us an amazing tool. The Psalms. The Psalms are just amazing letters. I mean, they're like poems and songs to God that are personal and deep and real, and very relatable. And, there's times where I just pray through the Psalms, and maybe I'll read a line and then stop and like expound on it or relate to it or apply it, to myself and my situation. And, if you read like something David talking about his enemies, you could apply that to whatever situation you're feeling is challenging in your life or whatever it is. But, Psalm 18, it's an amazing Psalm, but in Psalm 18, listen to David's heart here. And I'm only going to read the first few verses of it. But in Psalm 18, David writes, I love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge. He is my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call to the Lord who is worthy of praise, and I am saved from my enemies. In verse 6, he says, in my distress, right? So in all of that stuff I mentioned earlier that we all deal with, in my distress, I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. From his temple, he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. And then talks about how God answers and comes and delivers him. And just so much in here, though, that's so powerful if we don't just read it, but if we learn to really mean it. And I think that's what we've all got to really fight for, is building a walk with God where what David felt about God, who God was to David, that's who God is to you. That as you go through deep distress, or you're super overwhelmed with things, or hurt by things, or wrestling with something, or dealing with some real serious hardship or challenge in your life, that you are really learning to let God be who David is saying he was to him here. Like, God, you are my strength. You're the one who's going to deliver me. You're my fortress, the safe place for me to go to. That you're really going to Jesus. That going to God, going to Jesus is what David was doing here in his distress. And so you're really looking to God. Man, God, help me with this, and having those authentic prayers to him, relying on him, placing your hope in him, your trust in him. What helps me a lot is to just do what the Bible says, like cast your anxiety on God. If I'm feeling weighed down by something, I know I don't have to carry this on my own. I could go to God and go, God, I'm carrying a lot of weight right now. I need you to take this off of me. I need you to carry this with me. And God, I know you care about me. I know you can help with this. I know that you'll see me through this, and trying to put some of the pressure we feel, put it on God, because he doesn't feel pressured by it. He can handle it. He's big, he's powerful, and really trying to bring those things to God. And the last thing I'll say before we go to our second point is, it always helps to be constantly looking forward to and remembering heaven. That this life, this semester, this career is not the end of the story. It's not what it's all comes down to being about. That God does have a place prepared for us, that all this is working towards, where he will wipe away every tear from our eye. There will be no more sin or sorrow or stress or scars. He is making everything new. The old order of things that we're living in right now will pass away. And it just helps us so much to remember, like I said, to have something to look forward to, right? Like, okay, if I get through finals, then there's the Christmas break. Well, remembering as we go through life that heaven is, if we're faithful, heaven, eternal rest is in store for us, rest for our souls. And so looking forward to and remembering heaven can always help. And so which of these can you work on? How can you take Jesus up on this invitation to go to him? And the second point is to take on his yoke. And we want to focus on that because there's a lot of different ways for us to go to Jesus. And I just mentioned a bunch of them, and Hannah mentioned some. But the main way that we come to Jesus that he mentions here is where he says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. And so if we're weary and burdened, Jesus says, come to me. Okay, I got to go to Jesus. Well, how do I do that? What do I do now that I'm coming to you? He says, okay, you're coming to me. Great. Here's how you find rest for your soul that you're coming to me for. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. And so if we want the rest Jesus is offering our souls, we've got to take on his yoke and learn from him. Most of you probably know this, but what is a yoke? This is not Y-O-L-K. That's a yolk, an egg yolk. This is a Y-O-K-E, a yoke. And a yoke was a farmer's tool, right? Where you had two oxen that you were going to use to maybe plow your field or whatever. And the yoke was the wooden bar that was placed in between the two oxen. So, okay, you want rest, you've got to yoke yourself to me. You've got to attach yourself to me. Link yourself up to me. Walk how I walk. Go where I go. Follow my lead. Maybe you could picture like an older, experienced oxen that knows how to plow the fields, and a new, unbroken oxen being attached to it and just getting to follow that experienced oxen's lead. Like Jesus knows how to do life. He runs the universe. He created us, right? He knows you better than you know yourself. And so you can yoke yourself to him to learn from him. And, you know, in your own time, you could go back and read the verses right before this in Matthew 11, verses 25 to 27. It refers to us here as little children. It refers to God as our Father. You guys know the Bible, so many verses in the Bible depict God as our Father, right? And us as his children. The Bible also likens the qualities of God to being like a mother to us, you know, and this is the way God has chosen, you know, amongst other ways, but a major way that God has chosen to reveal himself to us. He wants us to do life. He wants to do life with us and us with him. He wants us to learn from him the way that a healthy parent-child relationship would go. And, you know, I've got two kids, right? And my kids have hard days sometimes. They come home from school stressed, wiped out. Maybe their feelings got hurt or they're insecure about something. And I want them to tell me, and I want them to feel safe telling me. You know, unfortunately, so far they seem to. And we want to encourage that and foster that. But, you know, when my kids, when Bradley or Tyler, when they have a hard day or they're sad about something or insecure about something or somebody hurt their feelings, I want to connect with them. I want to hear the whole story. I want to feel it with them. I want to listen to them, and I want to help them. Like, and we'll talk through it. And maybe a kid said something mean, and I want to listen and how did that make you feel? But then I want to help them too and say, hey, you know, when I was little, I remember kids being mean to me sometimes, and I felt that way too. And here's what helped me deal with that, you know, and I want them to listen and learn from me so that they can go back and grow and do better. And, you know, I think this is the picture we need to have of God, except I'm an imperfect parent and God is the perfect parent. Like, he loves you. He cares about you. He can help you, and he wants to go through life with you and teach you along the way. And so from this passage, I think to summarize it, what can give us peace or rest in life for our soul? It's these two aspects. It's learning to do life with Jesus, that we're really doing life with God, not on our own and sprinkling God in, but we're yoked to him. We're learning to do life with God, but we're also learning to do life God's way. We're taking his yoke upon us and we're learning from him. We're letting him teach us. And I love that Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. You might say, hey, being a disciple is not that easy. Well, when you compare it to doing life not God's way and doing life without God, it is a much lighter burden to do life with God and Jesus's way than without. A lot of times when being a disciple is hard, it's when we're tempted with sin that we don't want to give up or give away. It's when we're not trusting and relying on God through hardships. Like the stuff that makes discipleship hard is our fault, not Jesus's fault. But it is hard, it's a high calling. And yet Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And I think why he was able to say that is because when following Jesus is contrasted to the religion that the Jews had created between people and God, following Jesus was a lot lighter than the religious system that they had set up. And also, when you compare following Jesus to the way that the world teaches us, the way the world teaches people to live, it's much less burdensome. Jesus does call us to a high standard of righteousness and holiness, but he does that on the basis of grace, love, relationship, and comes from somebody who literally gave his life for us. And so I think we do got to wrestle through some of this different false advertising about Christianity that comes up, right? The false advertising about Christianity is that Christianity is rules that make life lesser. But the reality is that Christianity is a relationship with God that makes life better, that makes life fuller. That when we yoke ourselves to Jesus, we find that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. That doing life with God in his way is so much better. And we're young. We get to choose our trajectory and how we're going to go through life and where we're going to end up. The truth is that there is so much pain. There's so much pain and wearing down on our souls that could be spared by learning from Jesus. When you think about the consequence of sin in people's lives and on their souls and on their hearts, the guilt that comes with sin, when you consider the pain of broken marriages, of having a bad relationship with your adult children, the weight of going through life with hopelessness, loneliness, the disappointment of placing hope in wealth and finally being rich at the end of your life and realize you didn't invest in the right things, right? The pain of living by our feelings and making mistakes. Jesus is offering another way. All of that pain, right? All of that pain can be avoided if you go through life with God, with his people, and doing it Jesus's way. Right? I think we got to stop and ask. The world tries so hard to convince us that its ways are better, smarter, right? That Christianity is not the way. But let's stop and just ask honestly. Let's just be honest. Is the world getting better? Like the world we live in, like since you've been old enough to realize the state of the world, right? Like since you've been 12 or whatever. Like as the world continues to do things its way, is the world getting better? Is there more peace than there was 5 years ago in our world? Is there more healing? Is there more joy? Is there more unity and fulfillment, right? Is there more righteousness? How are people's mental health and right? How are people's families, marriages? Are people living feeling fulfilled, right? Are people more and more trustworthy as time goes on? I would answer no to all of those things. Right? The world's way does not work, but they don't know anything else. So keep leaning into it more, hoping it will work. And the whole time Jesus is saying, come to me, you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And all of that is often done under some false perception that I'm just doing things my way, not somebody else's way. And the reality is, no one is truly going through life completely unyoked to anyone or anything, right? Nobody is doing entirely what they think alone and not influenced by someone or something else. Everyone is learning from, yoked to, or being influenced by something or someone else. We all choose whose way of life we want to trust and follow. And we can choose to follow someone else's, our own, or we can choose to follow the one who made us, who knows us best, and died for us. And so we have to be careful at school, on social media, right? You've got to be careful that what we see and what we hear, we are learning from. And if we're not careful, we could be swept up into the mindset of the world. But we've got to remember the world's way does not work. We've got to remember who the ruler of this world is. In Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1-5 says, "As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world and the ruler of the kingdom of the air." It's talking about Satan, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. And then it goes on to talk about how God saved us by his grace. But this talks here about how we used to follow the ways of the world. And if we're not careful, we could slowly be caught up in that again. And yet by God's grace, we've all been saved, right? Or maybe you're studying the Bible, and by God's grace, you can be saved when you choose to follow Jesus. But the reality is we're still here in this broken, fallen world. We need rest for our souls. And only God can offer that part to us here and then one day fully in heaven. But we've got to be careful with who are we learning from, and making sure that who we're learning from, who we're yoked to, is Jesus and not this world, our own thoughts and feelings, or people in this world. And that could be hard to do, because to be yoked to Jesus, we might have to unyoke ourselves to something else. We might have to unlearn things that the world taught us. And that can be challenging, but that's what we need to do if we're going to be yoked to Jesus. And so Hannah's going to speak a little bit more here, and then we'll close it out.
All right. So like Rob was mentioning, taking on Jesus's yoke and learning from him means that we have to put off our ways. And our ways of finding rest will not give us rest for our souls. And they are counterfeit, really, compared to Jesus's yoke and his way. And I'm speaking to myself, because initially when I'm feeling burdened or weary, choosing Jesus's way and teachings can feel so hard. But I need to follow his example, because this will lead to rest. And so, with everything that Rob was talking about, I just wanted to share a bit personally, but also in a way that I'm sure some of you all can relate to. So I picked 3 things that I see that we can learn from Jesus that are the most difficult for me when I'm feeling weary and burdened. And the first one, I feel like I could talk about forever about why this is the hardest thing. But in Mark 1, verse 35, it says, "Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed." I don't know about you, but getting up early in the morning and praying is the last thing that I want to do when I'm feeling like I need rest. Like, I want to stay in bed, obviously, because that's going to give me the rest that I need. And most of the time, like, if I have that thinking, it's probably because I didn't prepare myself to get up early in the morning. I'm sure Jesus was more prepared for that, but I probably failed in a bunch of things that I was doing the night before and stayed up way too late. So again, that's already why it's so hard for me. But I need to ask myself, will I choose to learn from Jesus? Will I choose to follow his example? And, for all of us, it's going to look different how we learn from Jesus when we see that scripture. But I think that it was just so clear that Jesus knows that this is what I need. I need to go to God first like first thing, before I try to conquer the world, before I try to deal with all the things that are making me worried and the challenges of my day, but I need to go and I need to pray and I need to put my requests before God. I need to put into practice being vulnerable with God, like I was talking about in the first point. And I need to learn just from Jesus's example. So that's the first. The second, that can be really hard for me to learn from Jesus when I'm feeling weary and burdened, is Matthew 6, verse 33. And that's another passage that just all in the verses prior to verse 33 just talk about different worries that we can have. But in the end, it says, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. And this can feel really hard, to let God rule my decisions, to put God first, to put his way first, to not seek first what I want or what I think is best, because that's usually the easiest. It's the first thing that comes to my mind. Jesus's way is not always the more natural or convenient way. But again, like, even though this doesn't feel like the easiest or the most natural, I have to ask myself, will I choose to learn from Jesus? Will I choose to follow his example? And will I trust that this is what's going to lead me to rest? And, you know, we've had lessons on what it means to seek first the kingdom, and in all of our lives, that's, you know, different things are going to stand out to us. But I think that that's something that we have to remember when we think about learning from Jesus. And the last one that I'll share is in Matthew 16, verse 24 to 25. It says that Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And I think that, I don't know, this doesn't really sound super practical, but the practical thing that's standing out to me is, and for all of us, it's going to be different. Like, what does it look like to deny yourself? But denying myself when I'm weary and burdened usually looks like denying myself when I'm feeling annoyed and frustrated, when I want to get an attitude with the person who's annoyingly walking really slow in front of me and is making it harder and more stressful to get to my next thing. I need to learn from Jesus and his example to be patient and loving and kind to people. And again, like, the last thing I want to do in that moment is deny myself. I just want to not think about Jesus's way in that moment. I just want to be ruled by my emotions and my feelings. But I love what Rob was talking about too, I think in the first point, where he was saying that, like, I can relate to this with this point of, that's just going to make me even more wearied. I'm going to be feeling guilty for the attitude I had with that person. And I'm thinking about, man, what if she was having such a rough day? Like, when I could have just choose to be patient and loving. And yeah, so those are the three things that I wanted to share about that are just helpful for me to think about learning from Jesus's way instead of following my own when I'm feeling weary and burdened.
Amen. Thanks so much, Hannah. I hope this has been helpful for you all tonight. And, you know, not just this month, but just in life, as you are going to go through periods where you're weary and burdened and wrestling with all of the different facets of it that I mentioned earlier and that we talked about tonight. It's so important to hear what Jesus has to say to us here, that there is only one best place to go, and that's to Jesus. And so when we are in that place, we've got to go to Jesus and not go the other places that we might be drawn to going that won't really give us what only God can give to our souls. And big part of going to Jesus is taking on his yoke, doing life with him, side by side, step by step with him,
and learning from him, learning to be like him, to face things as he would, to go to God and trust God through things as he would, to treat people as he would as we go through whatever it is that we're just consistently, hey, I got to learn from Jesus because Jesus knows best. His way is best. And doing things his way will bring peace and rest to my soul rather than more stress and becoming more weary and burdened. And so let's all go to Jesus, take on his yoke, and learn from him so that we can find rest for our souls. Amen.